Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, and welcome to our broadcast. Our first guest will not be with us tonight. There was a little bit of a scheduling conflict, but we will be speaking tonight with Pastor Arthur. But before we do, I want to update many of you around the globe, especially my fellow Americans, as to what's going on with regard to a number of issues that are now troubling people across this country. Now, let's start with Ukraine. Many people have said to me, gee, you're a retired lieutenant commander in the Navy. You've always been a hawk, if you will, meaning that I believe in using the ultimate power, which is military power against any enemies looking to destroy this country. I would be the first one on the front line saying, let's fight and let's destroy our enemies. But Ukraine is a whole different story. For about 2 years, I have been warning the American people. And I believe that there may have been some others in this country who have broadcasts like mine who have been warning the American people that we're stepping into what I labeled as Vietnam Chapter 2. Well, people said, well, you know, you're kind of overreacting. You're scaring people. Certainly, it's not going to become a quagmire like Vietnam. And so as time went on, we began to watch closely how the Biden administration was getting itself deeper and deeper and deeper into this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So it started off, now I want you to think about this. It started off with what? It started off with the United States government being very upset over an election that took place in Ukraine. Does any of you Americans recall what happened in Vietnam when that started? The American government, by the way, under a Democrat, was very upset over an election that took place in South Vietnam. So somehow, some way, there were reports that the individuals who were elected were removed from power and that the U.S. government was involved in the removal of these people from power. So there's kind of a very interesting parallel in the beginning of this conflict in Vietnam. Then, as soon as the new individuals, if you will, were put into power as the president of Ukraine, the president of South Vietnam, all of a sudden, the war began. There was a encroachment of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese decided to cross the border into South Vietnam, the communists, if you will. And then the Russians decided under Vladimir Putin to go in and to invade what they believe to be their property, Ukraine. Be that as it may, the fact of the matter is that the United States government couldn't keep their nose out of this conflict. You would think they would learn from Vietnam. So it escalated from what? Well, let's give Zelensky some money, just like we gave the South Vietnamese. Hey, give them some money, give them a few $1 billion. It'll quiet things down. They'll be able to buy weapons. They'll be able to buy arms and ammunition. Well, what we didn't count on, at least here in Ukraine, and maybe we realized what was going on in South Vietnam at the time, that a lot of that money was going into the pockets of politicians. Exactly what is happening, folks. A lot of that money goes in to where? A lot of the pockets of politicians, whether it be South Vietnam back in the 50s and 60s or Ukraine now. So then the money isn't enough. It isn't enough. How do I know that? Well, South Vietnamese government at the time said we need more money from the United States government. We need more money from the nations that are allied with the United States. And by the way, Canada at the time had committed thousands of troops fighting side by side with American troops. But before the fighting began, the money went. But the money wasn't enough. So then we have Zelensky here in Ukraine, decides to visit the United States of America, goes before our Congress, and pretty much demands that, you know what, you guys got to send some more money. And then he's on a video or an interview, and he's talking about, well, the fight in Ukraine, if it doesn't end there, well, U.S. troops might have to come in and the blood of Americans will be spilled. Now, that's the way it was interpreted, what he said. Now, whether he meant that or not, well, that's the fact checkers to check. But whatever he said led people in this country to believe that he was pretty much trying to intimidate us for our tax dollars. But that wasn't enough. He goes to Canada and he meets with his communist buddy. And look, for the fact checkers, I want you to understand something. When I call Justin Trudeau a communist, I truly believe it. And I'm entitled to my opinion. Now, your fact checkers may say, well, he's not a communist. Well, how do you know that? I feel he is. My view, my opinion. we still have freedom of speech in the United States of America. In fact, I've got to tell you, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden are no better than the communists sitting in the capital of Canada. These guys are from the same cloth, but that's another day with another issue. But the fact of the matter is now, so the money was not enough. They want more weapons in South Vietnam. We sent more weapons. Ukraine, he wants more weapons. We sent more weapons. But then Joe Biden decides to take a step further, just like what we did in South Vietnam. He decides to send troops, all right, into where? Well, the bordering countries, be it Poland, be it some of the NATO countries. He decides to say, well, we're going to send some troops in to do what? To scare Putin, to scare him. We're going to make sure he sees U.S. troops there. I'd like to know what the 200 troops in Poland are going to do if the Russians decide to take an aggressive move. I'd really like to know what they're going to do. But be that as it may, so Biden sends troops to NATO countries that are going to do nothing because NATO's going to do nothing. They haven't done much at all yet with regard to Ukraine. In fact, they want to back off, and we'll get on that subject in a minute. So the South Vietnamese, well, we decided to send U.S. troops to South Vietnam. And guess where? Guess where the troops were stationed at the beginning of sending combat troops to South Vietnam? The embassy, folks. The South Vietnamese embassy. And just a few days ago, John Kirby, I'm sorry to say that he's a former admiral in the United States Navy, the wonderful, wonderful branch of service that I served in, who's become a real tool for the Obama-Biden people. John Kirby finally admits, well, we have troops. Yep, we have special forces. They're combat troops, folks, in Ukraine at the embassy. So my question is this. What is going to happen when, not if, but when, I hope to God I'm wrong, when somebody decides to take a shot at a U.S. troop, at a U.S. soldier across that embassy grounds? What happens if something really bad goes wrong and there's a casualty of a U.S. Military personnel in Ukraine? What do you think is going to happen, folks? The same thing that happened in South Vietnam. Overnight, before we even know it, U.S. combat troops will be on the ground. Again, in my view, fighting for what? And I implored the American people, and there's hundreds of you, and by the end of the week, there'll be thousands of you looking at this video. I implore you to please stand up and don't do what we did in the 50s and 60s when the Vietnam War was beginning to escalate. We were too quiet. We didn't make noise. And it was until after U.S. combat troops were committed to fight the Viet Cong and the South and the North Vietnamese, and the body bags started coming into Dover Air Force Base, not one or two at a time, not a dozen at a time, but 100 at a time. You want your children to fight a war? Well, let it be for the United States of America. Now, look, I do not condone, and I'm totally against what Russia's doing with regard to bombing innocent civilians. I think it's atrocious. But I'm also against an unlimited war, a war that's going to cost American men and women, teenagers, for goodness sakes, kids. Why do I say that? Because I was with them when many of them were sent to Vietnam. I didn't go to Vietnam. I was in support positions here in the United States that were supporting them with all sorts of intelligence information and equipment, etc. But I have friends and relatives. I have a relative who was a POW in Vietnam. The fact of the matter is that I don't want to see this happen again. The American people have been too busy concentrating on what, folks? And I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but the fact is, you know what? It seems to me at times, and I get angry at my own citizens, that Monday Night Football is more important than getting involved in saving the lives of the generation that is coming to take over in this country. That's right. It needs to be said, and I'm saying it. If people don't like to hear it, too bad. But we need to wake up as American citizens and realize that we're in serious trouble. So as all this is going on, right? As all this is going on, again, I had said something a few weeks ago, and it's coming to fruition. What was it that I said, folks? I said, that's all we have to hear is Zelensky just posing the idea or thinking out loud that we got to go and we've got to retake the Crimea. We've got to go take Sevastopol. We've got to go and we've got to take that piece of land that Russia took from us. You see, Russia didn't take that land from them. I believe it was Khrushchev who gave it to them. And all along, the Russians said it was theirs anyway. But again, that's another argument. And I warned, and I said that when the United States of America begins to hear that out of the mouth of Zelensky or any Ukrainian lawmaker, that they want to go in and they want to take the Crimea back, we're in trouble. We in the United States. Ukraine doesn't have the troops to fight the Russians in Crimea. Now you're dealing with their motherland. Folks, and I'm talking to the Americans, what do you think would happen if the Mexican army or the drug cartel, which is an army in itself, decided to invade Texas? Texas. Wasn't Texas part of Mexico a long time ago? And then we had New Mexico and California. What if they decide all of a sudden, hey, you know what? We're going to send our troops across the border. We're going to go retake part of Texas. You know what will happen? Overwhelming U.S. military force will be used to destroy those Mexican troops, the cartel or whatever, if they had ever decided to do that. Better yet, what would happen if, and this probably could happen based on what we're seeing now with regard to Biden's foreign policy, what would happen if Russian troops, at the request of the Mexican government, would put a base in Mexico? What do you think we would do, folks? Again, I'm talking to the Americans. What do you think we would do? Bad enough, the Chinese are already here, so all we need is Russian troops across our Mexican border. But anything could happen. My point is this, is that we would defend and fight and destroy those Russian troops crossing the border because our national security, right in our own country, in our territory, on our soil, on our real estate, would be threatened. So what do you think the reaction of the Russian government will be if Zelensky decides to send Ukrainian forces across that border into Crimea? He does not have, folks, he does not have the military manpower to defeat the Russian army on the ground when you start going after their territory. So guess what I believe he's depending on? American forces, NATO forces. Now, another guy that's probably going to be joining the Communist Party soon, that guy over there, Macron in France, who made it very clear, well, my new buddy is not only Justin Trudeau, but my new buddy is now President Xi of China. We love China. In fact, we ought to put the United States on the back burner. They're done. They're over with. So Joe Biden, how do you feel about that? You got Trudeau north of us. Now we got Macron over there looking to really disrupt NATO. The other NATO countries are quiet because they don't want to get involved in any bloodshed in Ukraine. Now, this whole situation in Ukraine, it could have ended. It could have stopped. Yes, it could have. Now, I will say one thing that again troubles me. Not that I trust the Chinese. I would never trust them. But when President Xi offered to sit down with Ukraine and Russia to try to come to some sort of agreement, my thought was, well, you can't trust any of these guys, but what's the harm? If we don't think that we should be involved in that, or Ukraine don't want to be involved in that, that's fine. But before the meeting was arranged, Joe Biden decides, well, unacceptable. Well, Joe Biden, who are you to dictate the foreign policy of Ukraine? And who are you, Mr. Zelensky, to dictate the foreign policy of the United States? So where does it end up? It ends up in Vietnam Chapter 2. I hope I'm wrong, and I pray to God I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm going to be wrong on this one. We're going to end up possibly in a ground war in Ukraine if Zelensky decides to cross that border into Crimea. But what's worse, now hear me again, American parents, hear me. What's worse, you could be sure, again in my view, that if we end up committing combat troops to Ukraine to fight the Russians, there's going to be a massive, massive invasion by the Chinese Communist Party of Taiwan. And what are we going to do? What are we going to do? This is why I'm against the policies of this government. Look, I believe in freedom and liberty. I believe in the Reagan doctrine of being upfront and spreading freedom and liberty and fighting the communists all around the world. But there's one great thing I like about that guy behind me. Before he went that far, he gave everybody a chance to sit down and talk. And if they didn't want to talk and they decided to do something crazy, well, he responded. And it was because of him and a few other people that the Cold War ended. But now we're in a real Cold War again with Russia and China and getting into a very, very bad situation. We're going to end up in a hot war. Look, I served. My kids served. My son was a Marine, fought in Iraq. My whole family served in the military. But I am obligated. I am obligated as one retired military officer in this country to warn you, the parents of today, to wake up. What can you do? Call your congressional representatives, let them know you're not going to tolerate or support a war in Ukraine. Now, saying that, if our troops end up there, we're going to support our troops. We're going to support our troops. We're going to let them know that we will do everything we could to support them. And the best way to support them is to make sure that it doesn't escalate to a point where not only 100 troops are at an embassy, not where there are 1,000 troops, 10,000, 20,000, an endless war. I remember way back in Vietnam days, don't worry, it's going to end in a week. It's going to end up 6 months, 10, 12, decade later, 50,000 American troops dead, thousands, folks, wounded, and still to this day recovering. Those Vietnam troops, every single one of those soldiers that went into battle, and a lot of people don't know this, they won every battle. Think about that. We won every single battle against the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese in Vietnam. And it was a politician who surrendered. And at that time, it was a Republican, Richard Nixon. He surrendered. We have Joe Biden surrendered in Afghanistan. And as this situation escalates and continues in Ukraine, we're going to end up surrendering again. In fact, Biden has surrendered everything of this country at the moment. But hopefully he will be defeated, impeached. I believe he will be impeached after we find out what's going on with him and Hunter and the Chinese Communist Party. But at some point in time, there's going to be a change. But here is something to think about. And I'll end this portion of it regarding Ukraine. The Chinese Communist Party, with regard to any war plans against Taiwan, have to move before the election here in the United States. The Russian military, Vladimir Putin, knows he has to make his move, whatever that will be, before Election Day here in the United States of America, which leaves us a little over 14 months before something very bad is going to happen, unless we, the American people, stand up. We're standing up here at Campaign for America. We're spreading the word. I'm asking those of you in the United States to do the same thing. Spread the word. My goodness, what is it going to cost you to speak up, to get together? What is it going to cost you? Are you going to have to see, like I did day and night, as Americans across this country, day and night? So the body count on TV, every single night and day, the body count, draped coffins with American flags draped on them every single day coming into Dover Air Force Base. And then the protests happened, and it was kids in college that were protesting. And you know, it ended up with kids being shot to death at Kent State University by the National Guard. And it wasn't the National Guard that did that purposely, but somebody messed up. Is that what you want? Again, I'm talking to my countrymen. Is that what you want? Because if that's what you want, then go vote Democrat, then go support Joe Biden. Do that if that's what you want. But if you don't want that, wake up, get involved. Don't sit back and say, oh, somebody else should do it. Well, when everyone says somebody else should do it, nobody else is going to do anything. So that's the Ukraine war update and how I feel. And hopefully there are many others who feel about that. Now, Justin Trudeau, 200,000 to his foundation collapsed. Remember we said they all get caught, folks. We've been going on and on and on and on. They all get caught. So now his board of directors, I guess, on his foundation decide to resign. Remember what I said? Look, you better get out of the way. You better jump ship because Trudeau will throw you overboard. Well, he's going to be on that ship, and he's going to, and either you get off or he's going to throw you overboard to drown. Because Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden and Hunter, all these guys have something in common. And believe me, it's something that many of us here in the States are looking at closely and carefully. Justin Trudeau's received the money from the Chinese Communist Party. So has the Biden crime family. Now, what would be interesting is if there was some collaboration, some talk, some business talk, if you will, between Trudeau and Biden all this time. So we're hoping to get our Congress, and we're working hard on this. You know, I don't know if we'll be successful, but at least we're working on it, and we're raising the question. Wouldn't it be great to subpoena some of these people, U.S. people, before the United States Congress? Subpoena their phone records, subpoena their chats in chat rooms, subpoena what's on their computers. Let's find out who they've been talking to. And wouldn't it be interesting if we did find, and I'm not saying this is fact, that there was some discussion regarding the Chinese Communist Party money flowing into the United States and Canada, if there was some discussion between the Canadian government and the United States government under Biden and Trudeau. Wouldn't that be something? Folks, I'm telling you this because they're scared to death. They meaning the government of Canada and the Democrats here in the United States are scared to death because a lot of this stuff is now being exposed. In the United States Congress now, under the House of Representatives now under control, the Republicans are going full steam ahead. You may not be hearing this in Canada, full steam ahead. They're subpoenaing everybody you could imagine to get down to the bottom of a lot of the problems we're facing in this country. And I've got to tell you, soon, we're going to be speaking to some congressmen face to face, and we're going to bring up these issues, and hopefully, they're going to take some action. But we'll stay on them. You've got friends here in America, and I don't promise that we're going to do everything overnight, but one thing we know has happened, and one promise we were able to keep: we're not going to sit back, we're not going to go away, we're going full steam ahead within the framework of the law, because this is no longer an American problem, it's no longer a Canadian problem, but it is now a North American problem, which puts these two countries together. And it's a fight against the Chinese communists, who I believe have influenced Justin Trudeau, Joe Biden, and both of those crime families to a point that they are pushing every single thing down our throat, which is very similar to the Chinese Communist Party playbook. Just keep in mind, folks, they are scared of us. Believe me, they are scared. Let's see what happens as we move forward. All right, so I spoke to Pastor Arthur earlier. What a guy. And I have our interview recorded. I'm going to play it now. One of the things, we were able to upgrade some of our software where we can now record interviews earlier and then play them live tonight. So now I'm going to bring Pastor Arthur on. It was a fascinating discussion with him. And then I'll be back after our interview with the good pastor is done. So here is now Pastor Arthur. Well, Pastor Arthur, it's great to see you again. I've got to tell you, the prayers of not thousands, but I can tell you a few million Americans are with you. They're very well aware of what you have faced. And I know your countrymen and women are also doing the same. So thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back on your show.
Well, could you give us an update? What's happening now and where you're headed? And, we'll find out what more we can do to help you moving forward.
Well, I'm telling you, I don't know where to start. It's truly a Pharaoh's Egypt moment, if you will. The enemy is pounding on us left and right. I mean, I've never seen such a hostility towards Christianity, towards the Bible, towards Jesus, towards God ever. Even under communism, I have never seen more hostility from a communist government then than it's coming from the fascist, socialist, communist government that we have here in Canada. They're passing laws, Stephen, that are absolutely straight from the pit of hell. For example, the mayor passed a law that you cannot peacefully protest grooming of the children. You cannot do it. You have to be so far away that no one can see you. And if you dare to do a peaceful protest, which is one of the fundamental rights in this country, under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, under our Constitution, the Criminal Code of Canada. And by the way, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms starts, are you ready? With a preamble where it says, whereas Canada acknowledges the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Now God is out of the picture. And of course, when God is kicked, there is no rule of law. There is chaos, lawlessness, corruption. The checks and balances disappeared. Accountability, zero. Those bureaucrats, appointed bureaucrats, are breaking law left and right without any consequences. It's fascinating to watch Canadian politics because I still remember, many years ago, decades, when there were scandals happening either in Canada or United States, when they were caught lying. It was like front page, you got to resign. And so many people had to resign. Now the politicians are lying every second day. I mean, they will tell you one thing in the morning, they'll change the story in the evening, and somehow that's perfectly acceptable now. Okay, so you can go to prison if you oppose, in the city of Calgary, grooming of the children, the drag queen story hour, where perverts, predators dress themselves in a sexual manner and are indoctrinating, sexualizing children as young as 0 to 8, they say. This Saturday is another grooming of the children, 0 to 8. And you can, parents are encouraged to bring their toddlers so they can watch a perverted person that we used to help in a mental institutions. We used to help those kinds of individuals because obviously they're so messed up, they cannot help themselves. Now we don't help them. We encourage those people to go public and to pervert the next generation. So that's one front. Pastor Derek Reimer is still in prison. Of course, that's the pastor, a friend of mine that we do ministry together. He opposed that in a library, publicly funded library. Those drag queen stories are also taxpayers funded. Millions upon millions of dollars are being given to the groomers to do this to our children. And the saddest part is, politicians are corrupted. We all know that. We have seen it in the past 3 years. But you know what is the saddest part of the story? Is that the chief of police, with his gangsters in uniform, because they're no longer police officers, they're mafiosos, muscle for the biggest mafia that there is, government, are protecting the groomers. They're not protecting the children. They're not protecting the parents that are voicing their opposition to the grooming. They're protecting the groomers, the pedophiles. It's absolutely shocking to me how low law enforcement has fallen. Of course, I'm sure you've heard about the legalization of heavy drugs in Canada. So now you can be hooked with cocaine if you want, and the government will pay for it, and they will supply. And again, remember when I was in prison, every single day, multiple times a day, we were offered 5 heavy addictive drugs. Every single day by the guards and the nurses. Every day they would knock at my door in my cell offering me at least 5 heavy addictive drugs, fentanyl, and then cocaine. I saw inmates snorting. I saw inmates selling, buying those drugs freely. And they were not smuggled into the prison. They were provided to the inmates by the guards and the nurses. So everything is upside down. What else? Well, there is
one more thing, for the benefit of our new listeners and viewers, would you share with them why you were in prison?
Yeah. So, well, which version do you want? The mainstream propaganda version, or
We
or the
want the truth. We want the truth.
so I was a businessman before. So that's what I did for a living. I built houses. I used to own a media company. I used to develop land. So I was in a business, and then I started to work with the homeless people, and very quickly I realized how corrupted this industry is. The shelters are being paid per head, like cattle, more money from the government. So it was in their best interest to eliminate a person like me that was doing this for free, and we were highly successful taking people off the street. So anyway, I didn't know any of that stuff at the beginning. I was so naive. My wife thinks I'm the most naive person on earth because I want to believe people. I want to believe what you say is the truth. I don't see you coming as a snake trying to hurt me and bite me. So I thought the government is actually working for the people. I thought that the shelters are actually helping people. And then, whoops, wow, what a shock I got when the stories started to come my way. And of course, the authorities, the police, the bylaws, the media turned on us. And we were very successful. Within 3 months, we took 600 people off the streets, and that's where I landed in trouble. I started to receive tickets for feeding the homeless, organizing church services in the parks that no one wanted even to venture in. I was targeted. I was the first Canadian to be arrested for publicly reading Bible without amplification. Anyway, there was a 10-year of ongoing crazy fight, over 100 court cases, 11 arrests. I won my final court of appeal case, and for a few years they left me be until the invisible enemy showed up. The 2020, I was the first Canadian to get a COVID ticket. And from then, when I refused to shut down my soup kitchen, when I refused to shut down our church, according to the words of Jesus, that we must gather, that do not forsake the gatherings of the saints, take care of the orphans, the widows, and the poor, feed the hungry, lay hands on the sick, do a Holy Communion, remembering what I did for you, and worship me, right? Jesus lives in the worship of his people. I refuse to bow before this new tyranny, even the communists. And you gotta remember, I grew up behind the Iron Curtain under the boots of the Soviets. I've seen this before. But even the communists, as crazy as this sounds, even the communists did not shut down all the churches. They didn't dare to shut down all the churches. Imagine the tyranny that we have right now in the past few years. So anyway, I refused to cooperate with those devils. I fed the poor. I kept the church going. I still did Lord's Supper. We were singing, which we were told the entire neighborhood is going to collapse and everyone will die if we will keep singing. Well, we did. No one died, but I ended up with over 40 COVID tickets. And then in the end, I was arrested. I was arrested for keeping the church going, inciting people to come to church, officiating an illegal gathering, participating in an illegal gathering, baptizing my daughter, laying hands on the sick, doing Lord's Supper, communion. And then, of course, the famous video, as you remember, the Get Out Nazis, when they dared to come inside our holy place during our most holy time of the year, Passover celebration. So I kicked them out. I told them to get out. Eventually they go. They come back with a warrant. Then they come back with another crooked judge's order. So one was David Gates, then John Rook, the crook as I call him, and then eventually Adam Germain. I call them the three crooked amigos of the government, fascist, communist, socialist government, the judges that enabled the gangsters to come and try to shut us down. Well, fast forward, I got arrested in the middle of the highway for my crime of keeping the church going. My brother David as well. We spent days in prison. Then we got arrested again and again and again. And eventually I was part of the truck convoy. And, at that time, I was known as the Canada's pastor. I was known as the freedom pastor. So when the truckers and the farmers started to go to Ottawa, I was asked if I would do church services for the truckers. And of course, there was no hesitation. I want to tell you, a year later, this was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen on this soil. It was remarkable. Every color, every Cree, young and old families, they were bringing their cats and their dogs and their horses, people feeding each other, praying for each other, singing with each other, loving, crying with each other. So I did a number of church services for the truckers, and it was that church service at the border between Montana and Alberta, my 19-minute sermon, when I said to the people, stand up for your rights, do it solidarity style movement, civil rights movement, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., non-compliance. Do it solidarity way. Just refuse to work for the pharaohs and it will collapse the corrupted system. But do it peacefully. No guns, no swords. This is a peaceful uprising. For that sermon, I was arrested by RCMP. RCMP is like American FBI. They waited outside my home. There was anti-terrorists. There was a uniformed Calgary police, undercover police, special unit with cameras from the anti-terrorists, and also detectives. I was interrogated for hours, then put in prison. My bail was denied. Crown prosecutor said that I am pretty much the most dangerous individual in Canada. I cost Canadian economy with my speech over $400 million worth of damages. I incited people to commit acts of murder. He compared my speech to Rwanda genocide. It was gong show. The whole thing was a gong show. I spent 50 days, 45 in isolation, being taken from my solitary cell to another one in concrete, no water, no washroom. I was placed in metal cages. I was intimidated, harassed. Later, we found out that the guards were giving incentives to the inmates to murder me in prison, to beat me up. Eventually, I was kidnapped by sheriffs, literally kidnapped. I had no access to my lawyers for 3 weeks. They refused my access to my lawyers. And then I was taken to hundreds of miles away to Riemann in Edmonton. I was placed in MaxPot. MaxPot is a place for the most dangerous terrorists in the country. So they put me there. I was the only inmate in the entire unit. It was crazy.
Pastor, it seems to me, well, two things. Let's say this. I'm familiar with the scripture, what man meant for evil, God meant for good. And when I hear what happened to you, I see because of you and what you suffered and what you faced and what you fought for, as well as the Freedom Convoy, it opened up the eyes of the world about Canada. I've got to tell you, we would not have known any of what you're sharing with us. We would not have known how the Chinese Communist Party is now in bed with Trudeau in that disgraceful, disgusting parliament. I've got to tell you, we would not have known that. But now that we know, they've got a serious problem. And the problem is the American people. Because day by day, week by week, month by month, we are getting the word out. And I've got to tell you, it's not sitting very well here in the United States, what we see happening in your country. But indeed, God has used you mightily. You remind me of Joseph, who was put in prison, right, by Pharaoh. Remember that? And finally, he got out, and God used him for the good. Let me ask you this question, and it's a question that I find myself very difficult to answer. So maybe you could help me answer it. Here in the United States, we've got similar problems, but thank God, with regard to drag queens, governors now and Governor DeSantis of Florida already had laws passed banning them from any activities in his state, and all this is being upheld in court. What I can't figure out, and my question to you is this: how is it that parents allow this to happen? I was stunned when I saw drag queens sitting on the laps of kids and vice versa. There was some videos of nude men in an elementary school walking around, and the parents applauding. Could you? I can't wrap my arms around how parents allow that. Can you?
Yes, actually, it's very simple. When you remove God out of your life, out of your society, out of your public square, out of your country, well, what remains. When you remove the light, what remains is the darkness. So those people are completely possessed by darkness. So you got to remember, in Canada years ago, they eliminated prayer from schools. So the kids are encouraged to go and get fentanyl and cocaine and snort and all kinds of different things, encouraged by the government to do that. But you cannot have a prayer. You cannot have a church service. It's prohibited. It's attacked every time a Christian rises up and says, hey, Muslims have their prayers in schools, why can't we? It's attacked viciously by mainstream media. So what we are observing here is decades of indoctrination. And listen to a Polish man, because I grew up in a country that everything we were being told was indoctrination, propaganda, lie on top of another lie. That's exactly what happened in Canada. And Americans, you should be afraid. You should pay attention to what's happening in Canada, because right now the eyes of Americans are on your south border, right? That's where the invasion is happening. That's where Biden's administration, the Democrats, are trying to weaken American economy and bring chaos, because you got to remember, that's exactly what they want. They want chaos. There is this Illuminati saying, a very famous one, out of chaos, our order will come. So they are bringing chaos into your country to destabilize economy and moral standards. But you should pay attention to your northern border, because here we have Chinese police stations already. We have Chinese soldiers being trained with Canadian soldiers. They're flying our jets. You should pay attention what's happening behind the Iron Curtain here in China, because this government is very, very hostile to America's way of life. This government,
this government, go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, this government wants to disarm Canadians. This is the next step. Pay attention what is happening in Canada, and please come to the rescue. We need help. We are being taken over by Chinese government right now. And we don't know what to do. I mean, the enemy, the guns are pointed at us and are so big. The giants of the land are so big. We need some help. And I know God is going to come and help us out. But Americans, you should pay attention, because God is saying to America, and I said that many times, when I landed in your country, when he sent me to warn American people, he said to me, tell this great American eagle that it's time for that eagle to rise up once again. That means you did it before, and it's time to do it again, and start flapping your wings. That means don't just watch what's happening, but action. You need to do something. I'll tell you why this is important for Americans to keep pressuring the Canadian government, because if we fall, if Canadian people fall, you're going to be surrounded by enemies, and will be more difficult for you to defend yourself when you're going to have such a huge border with China. You got to rise up right now.
Well, we are, and we were just in touch with the Congressional House Foreign Affairs Committee. They received our first documents, our findings on our Project Maple Leaf regarding censorship, Bill C-11. We have information we're going to release probably next week. We found some information that the Canadian police, or your government, if you will, may have used a U.S. military or a U.S. law enforcement asset to surveil on your citizens during the convoy. And if there were any American citizens there, then clearly the U.S. government, or the entity that gave the asset to the Canadian government, broke our laws. In addition to that, we're looking closely at trying to get our government to put Trudeau, to sanction him personally, and every member of parliament who supports him. And here's the key to this. And what you articulated earlier were clearly Chinese Communist Party policies. These aren't American policies or Canadian policies. What you described is born out of the Communist Manifesto from Beijing. They've been active here. I thank the good Lord. We're now tackling that problem. They can no longer buy any land in a number of states. We drew out the Chinese police departments out of New York City and other states. So we're advancing here very clearly. But you're right about really right about the southern border. There is so much concentration on the southern border. Our government is diverted with this war in Ukraine. That's a whole nother story. Yeah. But we're beginning to, as you say, awaken the eagle to look at what's going on in Canada and to take action. And what you have done, what you've gone through, your colleagues and the Canadian citizens have faced, and in providing us with critical information, we've gotten that to some of our government officials. And believe me, they're shocked. I mean, they were as shocked as I was when they actually began to read, see, and hear what's going on in your country. But I have high hopes for Canada. I believe that, look, God rose you up as a leader, and many, many like you, and every Canadian citizen to partner with us here in America to fight the Communist Party, because isn't that a fact? It's really a war between the freedom-loving people of Canada and America against communism. That's what it's all about.
100%, 100%. I want to tell you that there is already a talk with few congressmen, U.S. congressmen, about bringing me in to testify before the Congress. So maybe that's a project you can pick up as well.
Well, good. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to say to you, I'm glad you told me that, because now that they have the information we have with regard to C-11, I will follow up on that. I'm going to meet a congressman who's on that committee in about a month. I'm glad you brought that to my attention. We'll talk off the air, and you get me what I need. We'll get it to him.
Yeah, so, it's a very interesting situation right now that is unfolding. There's more and more truth coming out. I don't know if you have been paying attention. I think it was yesterday, the Trudeau Foundation, all the board resigned because they have been receiving money from the Chinese government for decades. I mean, this is nothing new. We were telling Canadians and Americans about what's going on, but at that time, not many wanted to believe us. When we saw soldiers, Chinese soldiers in Alberta and British Columbia, when we shared that, people just said, "You're crazy." When we were breaking the stories about the Chinese police stations in our country, they said, "You're crazy." When we were sharing about Chinese interference in our election, when the Chinese people were blackmailed that if they don't vote liberal, then they're going to be deported from the country, and the Chinese police were coercing and they were blackmailing Chinese people living here in this country. This is absolutely crazy. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They're being exposed and they're not stopping. So it's like a cornered animal, vicious animal. When you corner that, it's biting. And that's exactly what is happening right now. The new laws that they're bringing are completely against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, illegal, but they are getting away with the murder. You know what the Premier of Alberta just did? I mean, it's shocking because she is being perceived as the savior of Alberta. She just brought a law that you can inject children as young as 6 months old with this experimental injection, while at the same time we know that there are tens of thousands of people being having adverse reactions and dying. I mean, every day people are dying in Alberta, Canada, from this experimental drug, and yet the government here is not stopping. It's implementing more and more and more. People are crazy.
What I find interesting, the Trudeau crime family and the Biden crime family, and for the fact checkers out there, in my view, okay, we're going to say in my view, the Trudeau crime family and the Biden crime family, they parallel. It seems like the foundation of Trudeau crashed. We had just found thousands and thousands of dollars going to Hunter Biden and his dad, and it seems like that, they're almost like partners in crime. So I got to tell you, I look forward to the day that they actually share the same cell, the entire family in the same prison, because that's where they're going to end up. And we've tried to get, with some success here, we're trying to get through legally within the framework of our law, get information to let's say, some people in Canada who are of influence to let the legislators, the parliament members understand they're going down with the ship. Trudeau is not going to give them a life raft like Biden is not giving his party a life raft. As a matter of fact, Pastor, the Democrat Party here, who is Biden's party, they're all jumping ship. They've turned on him. They're going to leave him on that ship and it's going to sink. And I see that happening to Trudeau. But as you said, I go back to this, and I preach this to the Americans all the time, the liberals and the Democrats. You lived in a free country. You got the land of opportunity, the shining city on a hill. God has blessed you, and you're going against all of that to be enslaved by communists. And you nailed it when you opened up with this broadcast. The first target of the communist religion, spiritual faith and worship of God Almighty. And boy, do we see it coming alive, that opposition in your country.
Yeah, and you got to remember, historically speaking, and I always tell the people, it's not Artur Pawlowski, it's not my wisdom, it's not my gospel, it's history. Every single time in history, when religion goes down, so your right to worship, your freedom to worship as you see fit goes down, all the other freedoms follow. That's history. Why? Because this is a competition between wannabe pharaohs, the kings of today, and a real God. And my God says, who comes to me is free indeed. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. You see, the idea of freedom is not yours and not mine. The idea of freedom has been given to us when we were born by God himself. Freedom. Jesus lived, he walked, he died, he rose from the grave for freedom. He wants you to be free, and that's what Satan hates the most. Those are Satan's minions. They're after freedom. They don't want you to be free. They don't want you to prosper. They don't want you to be happy. The Bible says the joy of the Lord is my strength. They don't want you to be joyful. They don't want you to be happy. They want you to be miserable, eating onion and garlic like in Egypt. So we are about to see a plagues of Egypt, if you will, and the Red Sea phenomenal. I believe that we are about to see the greatest judgment that we have ever seen on this side of eternity, but also a greatest redemption that God is bringing. What I'm trying to say is this, that the giants, the mountains that we're facing are so huge that without God's help, we cannot win them. But with God, they already lost.
Thank you, Pastor. I just got a note up here to end the interview. I guess we're timed with this software. But listen, I'm going to get in touch with you. I want to talk to you about moving forward with our Congress, and I've got to tell you, we're going to have you on again. All right. I didn't know we were, with this, we have to get better software. That's all. So, but thank you, Pastor. God bless you. Our prayers are with you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, folks, what an interview with regard to another hero in the fight for freedom and liberty. Well, it's something I want to inform the Canadian citizens about. I'm going to show you something here. Right? I'm sure you're all familiar with this. Could you see that, folks? That is the YouTube channel of a guy named Justin Trudeau. Well, some of our team members thought, well, maybe what we ought to do here in America, because we can do that legally within our own country, not getting involved in the inner workings of your country, maybe we'll have some of our team members fact check a lot of what he says on his channel. And then when we find that what he is not spewing out of facts, is to request that YouTube censor him and his live streaming into the United States. Now, far-fetched? Well, anything goes today, right, folks? I mean, if everybody's fact-checking everyone, well, we here in America who are concerned about our national security, concerned about fake news and false information going out, why not fact-check this guy? We certainly fact-check President Biden, right? They fact-check Trump. They fact-check this guy. They fact-check me. So why don't we in the United States add another fact check with regard to what's coming out of the mouth of Justin Trudeau? Now, somebody asked me a question, why are you angry at Trudeau? Look, I don't know the guy, all right? I am angry at communism. I don't like communism. I don't want to be involved with anyone who is associated with communists. And Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, Justin Trudeau, and the Lord knows who else in Canada and America are in bed with the Chinese Communist Party. What about that, folks? So, as I said all along, we could use the law to truly address these people. The fact is, and I tell you, the fact is, I alluded to it earlier, they expect us to lay down, to instill fear into us. Look, I shared a few weeks ago, we put up a commercial, and we're going to start hitting real hard against the Chinese communists. Within 24 hours of really going after the Chinese Communist Party, two things happened. Well, I shouldn't say 24 hours, maybe more like 48, 72 hours. Two things happened. See this phone? I get a call. And on it says mainland China. I didn't answer it. I should have, maybe I should have taken a picture of it, but the fact is mainland China. That was after our commercial went out and we decided to address what's going on with the Chinese Communist Party. Secondly, we aired those commercials on other platforms. I'm not going to share which ones, all right, but one of them had ties to the Chinese Communist Party. And we were banned because we did not comply with the CCP guidelines. I mean, get a load of that. All right. So now we know something. We know, folks, that we are, as I said earlier, a thorn in the sides of the enemies of freedom and liberty. It'll be up ultimately to the Canadian people to make changes in their country. It'll be up to the Canadian people to realize that they need to join the other Canadians who are fighting for freedom and liberty. As it is here in America, as it is up to the American people to do what they must do here. But together we can do things. And I'm committed and will continue to stay committed until we see the national security threat to the United States removed from our northern border. And of course, we will do everything we can to get our Congress to act, but we, the people, can also act. We can act by sharing information. As always said, we have to work within the framework of the laws, and that's okay, because as long as we work within the framework of the law, nobody can hurt us. Nobody can accuse us of doing something outside the law. And I suppose Trudeau and the members of Parliament who support him are very, very angry at us and frustrated. Well, look, at my message to Trudeau, President Xi, the Communist Party, to the Biden crime family, to all of those who are frustrated and angry at us, you ain't seen nothing yet. You haven't seen anything yet. Believe me, we're going to fight and fight and fight again within the framework of our Constitution of the United States. And I know that the Canadian people are going to do the same within their Bill of Rights. And you who are communists, you who are in bed with the communists, just look at history. Do I need to tell you any more? You always lose and we always win. Folks, May 1st, I'm going to ask you to keep this in mind. Now, those of you who choose to laugh at this, you go right ahead, okay? But May 1st is going to be an important day for all of us in the free world because something is happening in Canada. And what's happening in Canada is that I understand on May 2nd, Pastor Arthur will be appearing before a court. And I believe they're going to sentence him or they're going to adjudicate something with regard to his trials. That's May 2nd. Well, I'm one of those political leaders in America who's not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm not ashamed and will never hesitate to say that there is power in prayer. I believe that. Maybe our enemies of freedom and liberty and enemies of God, enemies of Christianity and Judaism and religion in general, maybe they can fight with us with their weapons of politics and weapons of this and weapons of that and money. But they're no match. They are no match for the power of prayer. They're no match for the King of Kings. And they could laugh all they want at this. And again, I challenge them to look back at history. Every pharaoh, every king, every so-called leader of every government from day one, when they challenged God, that king crushed them. That's exactly what he did. He took down their kingdoms. And that is what's going to happen in the 21st century. So here's what I'm asking you to do. On Monday, May 1st, we might even maybe put something Monday night on the air about this. I'm going to ask you all across North America, please remember that day to pray for Pastor Arthur, to pray that the Lord God is with him in that courtroom. We're going to call it the North America Prayer Outreach. So between now and May 1st, we're going to be putting commercials up about that. And we're going to ask you to do that. Power of prayer, folks. They can't beat the sword of the Spirit. And, they look at people like me and others who talk about God and country and prayer. And Ronald Reagan went through this too. Well, what are those Jesus freaks? I mean, what are they trying to tell us? Well, you know what? I wear that as a badge of honor. Always have and always will. And I know the Canadian people fighting for freedom and liberty, the American people fighting for freedom and liberty, they wear that as a badge of honor too. All right, folks, it was a great, great, great program tonight. We're going to see you next Thursday night. By the way, our Wednesday night 4 to 5 minute radio messages are really doing well. They're being kind of shared all over the world. I'm getting emails from people in different countries, and to me, that is great. That is one of the greatest things we're able to do, because we talk about God and we talk about our countries and we talk about the strength that God gives us to fight for freedom and liberty. Ain't that great? All right, folks, so that's it. I wish you all the best over this next week. I'll be back from time to time. Look out for our commercials, okay? Please share this. Now, one more other thing, two things. Please, if you're not a follower on Rumble or Facebook or YouTube, but primarily Facebook and Rumble, please do so. It doesn't cost you. I think you push follow or friend or something like that. The other thing is push that like button on that Facebook page. I understand, never knew this before, that everybody who pushes a like button, it spikes the algorithm that gives our broadcast, it elevates us, I guess, on the top of that ladder, all right, on that ladder where when people will actually want to go to our page, we'll come up first. So if you could do that, that would be terrific. And finally, pray for us. We've got a lot of needs here, but you know what? He's a God that will provide our needs. So I pray and ask that you pray and ask God just to provide what we need so that we can continue this fight until the day of victory. That's it, folks. Thank you for joining me tonight. See you next Thursday night. All right, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. And then, you know what? You know what we're going to do as we leave here? I'm going to get a bell. Ding, 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 ding. Let freedom ring, okay? Let freedom ring. God bless you all. I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers.